The love that breaks you first. What if the love you crave is the same love that's been breaking you? Not in a loud, obvious way. Not with betrayal, violence, or chaos. But slowly. Intimately. With softness that suffocates and closeness that poisons. What if the story you call romantic was really a mirror, reflecting back everything you still refuse to heal? This is not about heartbreak. It's about recognition. The recognition that what you call love may have been something else. Addiction. Need. Projection. Reenactment. Self-abandonment in disguise. And to see that, you have to look where most men never dare. I end this video. We're going deep. We're going into why you're drawn to people who wound you, how toxic love hides in beautiful forms, what Plato and Nietzsche reveal about longing, truth, and suffering, and how to break free, not from love itself, but from the illusion of it. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Because this isn't self-help. This is a mirror and a sword. Let's start with Plato. He said, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light." That's what most love is. Not a journey toward truth, but a performance around it. You meet someone, they mirror your wounds, they trigger your history, and instead of healing, you reenact. You collapse into the roles. The pleaser. The fixer. The savior. The one who understands. You call it connection. But it's a contract. Unspoken. Unconscious. Heavy. Nietzsche saw this too, in his own ruthless clarity. He said, "There is always some madness in love. But there is also always some reason in madness. And the reason? It's that the person you choose often reflects the parts of yourself you still haven't owned. Your shadow. Your need for control. Your unresolved grief. Your longing for intensity, even if it costs you peace. So what do? You call the chaos passion. You call the inconsistency chemistry. You call the emotional highs and lows true connection. But really, you're hooked on the drama. The tension. The unpredictability, because somewhere deep in your nervous system, that feels like home. Here's the truth. Toxic love doesn't look toxic at first. It looks like magic. Like electricity. Like someone finally sees you. But what they really see is how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice to be loved. And the more you give away, the more you confuse love with disappearance. You don't get smaller all at once. You shrink one compromise at a time. One silence. One forgiven betrayal. One more chance you didn't really want to give. Until you're not in love anymore. You're in survival. Plato believed that love was a bridge to the divine. But most men never cross it. They get stuck at the halfway point, where attraction feels like purpose. Where longing feels like meaning. Where emotional intensity feels like growth. But it's not growth. It's attachment to your illusion. And until you break that illusion, you'll keep calling suffering devotion. Nietzsche wouldn't ask you to fix this. He'd ask you to burn through it. He'd say, "You must still have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. But that chaos isn't love. It's your unresolved longing. Your buried pain. Your unspoken needs twisting themselves into the shape of a person who was never built to hold you. This is the beginning of liberation. To realize that what you called love was really a way to avoid yourself. To realize that the person you thought would save you was actually a test. Not a punishment, a mirror. And now, you stop blaming them. You stop fixing them. You start facing you. You're not broken for wanting love. But you've been trained to want it in broken ways. To chase intensity over intimacy. To confuse pain with proof. To equate longing with loyalty. You've been taught to suffer quietly and call that strength. But strength isn't how much you can take. It's how much truth you can hold without collapsing. So we start here. Not with them. With you. With the version of you that still thinks love is earned. That thinks pain is normal. That thinks if you just love harder, they'll finally see you. He's not weak. He's unfinished. And now you walk him home. The seduction of suffering. You say it hurts, but you keep going back. You say you're tired, but you answer every time. You say you're done, but the moment they return, so does your hope. Why? Because somewhere along the way you stopped craving love and started craving the pain that came with it. Not because you're broken. Because you were trained to confuse pain with depth. Plato said, "We are wounded lovers of the soul, seeking completion in form." You seek completion not in peace, not in presence, but in friction. You think love is real when it hurts. When it tests you. When it pulls you apart and puts you back together again. over and over and over. But that's not love. That's pattern. Let's go deeper. That there's a reason toxic dynamics feel magnetic. They mimic the nervous system of unresolved childhood, where love was inconsistent. Where approval was earned. Where presence was conditional. Where affection came wrapped in pressure. So when someone offers you that same rhythm, the high followed by silence, the warmth followed by withdrawal, you don't run, you recognize it, and your body calls it love. Nietzsche would call this what it is: a craving for suffering disguised as passion. Because the suffering makes you feel worthy. It makes you feel like you're working for something real. It makes the temporary relief feel euphoric. That's not connection. That's withdrawal relief. That you've been seduced by suffering because it made you feel like you were fighting for something holy. You weren't. You were just avoiding yourself. Avoiding solitude. Avoiding silence. Avoiding the truth that the version of you who allows this is still seeking love through self-abandonment. You say, but we have a connection. You say, they see me like no one else. You say, I've never felt anything like this. Of course you haven't. Because pain, when paired with emotional intimacy, feels transcendent. It doesn't mean it's love. It means it's familiar, and what's familiar feels safe, even when it's destroying you. So how do you break it? You stop calling your suffering noble. You stop romanticizing the push-pull. You stop assigning meaning to the fact that they hurt you, then hold you. You stop turning your nervous system into a battlefield and calling it growth. Plato believed real love leads you upward. Toward clarity. Toward self-knowledge. Toward beauty beyond form. But toxic love, it pulls you downward, into confusion. Into contradiction. Into a desperate need for resolution from someone who profits from your disorientation. And you call it devotion. You call it loyalty. You call it commitment. But Nietzsche would call it cowardice, because real courage, it's not staying. It's leaving the thing that feeds your weakness and refuses to meet your strength. That it's walking away not when it's easy, but when your entire nervous system is begging you to stay. That it's sitting in the silence of self-respect instead of dancing again in the chaos of trauma bonding. The seduction of suffering is subtle. It says, love isn't supposed to be easy. They're just going through something. You're too sensitive. You expect too much. This is how real passion looks. No, that's how unhealed people love. That's how people who refuse to face their patterns pull others into their pain. And unless you stop seeing it as fate, you'll keep walking right into it. Here's the shift. You stop chasing love that excites you. You start building love that anchors you. You stop looking for chemistry. You start looking for alignment. You stop asking, do they feel familiar? And start asking, do I feel free around them? Because love isn't just intensity. Love is what remains after the intensity fades and you still choose each other, cleanly, calmly, without a nervous system on fire. You don't need to be rescued. You don't need the dramatic apology. The sudden clarity. The high-stakes reunion. You need your center. Your silence. Your edge. And the moment you choose that over the chaos, the spell breaks. You will grieve. Not just them. But the version of you who thought that kind of love was the only way to feel alive. But beyond that, grief is something pure. Self-respect. Peace. Freedom. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to suffer to feel seen. Plato's mirror, Nietzsche's fire. They didn't love you. They mirrored you. And the part of you they mirrored was the one you still hadn't faced. That's why it felt magnetic. That's why it felt meant to be. That's why you saw signs, dreams, symbols, meaning everywhere. Because it was meaningful. Not because they were your future, but because they were your reflection. Plato said, love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together. That's the myth of the soulmate. That there's another person who completes us. Who fills what's missing. Who finishes the sentence we've been whispering since we were children. But what if they weren't your other half? What if they were your unconscious projected outward? What if your longing wasn't for union, but for recognition? To see the part of yourself you've hidden alive in someone else's eyes. You thought it was love. But it was a mirror. They showed you the intensity you repress, the hunger you deny, the freedom you crave, the power you forgot, the chaos you secretly love, and in them, you didn't just find attraction. You found permission to feel. To want. To be more than the version of you that plays it safe. And you called that love. But it wasn't love. It was projection meeting desire. Nietzsche wouldn't let you romanticize this. He'd call it what it is. Man is an arrow pointing away from himself. You fall in love not to unite with someone else, but to avoid the one thing that terrifies you more than heartbreak, your own fire. Because if you looked directly at it, if you owned your own desire, your own pain, your own edge, you wouldn't need them to reflect it back. You'd become it. This is the hard truth. You don't want them. You want who you become in their presence. You want the clarity they unlock. You want the energy they stir. You want the version of you that feels alive when they look at you a certain way. But that version of you was always yours. They didn't give it to you. They only woke it up. And now, you don't need them to hold it. You need to hold it yourself. Plato believed love is a remembering. A return to what is eternal, beautiful, divine. But most people never reach that level. They get stuck in form. In the body. In the fantasy. In the illusion. They mistake a flicker of recognition for completion. And then they cling. Because if that person leaves, so does the fire. So does the magic. So does the self they haven't yet built alone. That's not love. That's dependency dressed up as destiny. That's emotional survival masquerading as a sacred bond. And Nietzsche, he'd call that the most dangerous illusion of all. Because it makes you think you've found something eternal. When really, you've just found the part of yourself you haven't integrated. Yet. Let's break it down. You meet someone. They reflect something back. You call it chemistry. But underneath it, you're thinking, around them I feel alive. Around them I feel free. Around them, I feel like I matter. But you're not in love with them. You're in love with the access to your own soul that you haven't yet learned to find without them. That's what makes it feel like loss when they leave. Because they took nothing from you. But they triggered everything you're afraid to carry alone. Here's what this means. They were your mirror. But the fire, that was yours. That version of you, the one who feels bold, electric, poetic, powerful, clear, he doesn't belong to them. He belongs to you. You just haven't made space for him without the reflection of another. Until now. Plato taught that real love takes you beyond the person. Nietzsche would say you must become worthy of the fire you're chasing. And when you combine both, you realize you're not here to be completed. You're here to complete the conversation within yourself. So you stop calling the person fate. You start calling them a teacher. Not because they knew more. But because their presence forced you to remember what you keep avoiding. And what are you avoiding? Your own edge, your own clarity, your own ability to live fully without needing to be chosen, your own willingness to walk alone because the truth is brutal. You needed them to feel whole. But only because you hadn't yet walked through the fire of becoming your own mirror. Here's the shift. You don't need to kill the feeling. You need to own its source. You stop saying, they made me feel alive. And you start saying, I felt something in me I hadn't met before, and now I will live from it, with or without them. That's power. That's sovereignty. That's the fire Nietzsche died for. That's the mirror Plato pointed toward. And now, it lives in you, breaking the spell. You called it love. But now that the fog is lifting, you see it for what it was, a spell, cast by unmet needs. Woven through projection. Held in place by the belief that pain equals purpose. You weren't loving. You were hoping. Love is what remains after the intensity fades, and you still choose each other, cleanly, calmly, without a nervous system on fire. You don't need to be rescued. You don't need the dramatic apology. The sudden clarity. The high-stakes reunion. You need your center. Your silence. Your edge. And the moment you choose that over the chaos, the spell breaks. You will grieve. Not just them. But the version of you who thought that kind of love was the only way to feel alive. But beyond that grief is something pure. Self-respect. Peace. Freedom. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to suffer to feel seen. Plato's mirror, Nietzsche's fire. They didn't love you, they mirrored you. And the part of you they mirrored was the one you still hadn't faced. That's why it felt magnetic. That's why it felt meant to be. That's why you saw signs, dreams, symbols, meaning everywhere. Because it was meaningful. Not because they were your future, but because they were your reflection. Plato said, love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together. That's the myth of the soulmate. That there's another person who completes us. Who fills what's missing. Who finishes the sentence we've been whispering since we were children. But what if they weren't your other half? What if they were your unconscious projected outward? What if your longing wasn't for union, but for recognition? To see the part of yourself you've hidden alive in someone else's eyes. You thought it was love. But it was a mirror. They showed you. The intensity you repress, the hunger you deny, the freedom you crave, the power you forgot, the chaos you secretly love, and in them, you didn't just find attraction. You found permission. Permission to feel dot. To want dot. To be more than the version of you that plays it safe. And you called that love. But it wasn't love dot. It was projection meeting desire. Nietzsche wouldn't let you romanticize this, that he'd call it what it is. Man is an arrow pointing away from himself. You fall in love not to unite with someone else, but to avoid the one thing that terrifies you more than heartbreak, your own fire. Because if you looked directly at it, if you owned your own desire, your own pain, your own edge, you wouldn't need them to reflect it back. You'd become it. This is the hard truth. You don't want them. You want who you become in their presence. You want the clarity they unlock. You want the energy they stir. You want the version of you that feels alive when they look at you a certain way. But that version of you was always yours. They didn't give it to you. They only woke it up. And now, you don't need them to hold it. You need to hold it yourself. Plato believed love is a remembering. A return to what is eternal, beautiful, divine. But most people never reach that level. They get stuck in form. In the body. In the fantasy. In the illusion. They mistake a flicker of recognition for completion. And then they cling. Because if that person leaves, so does the fire. So does the magic. So does the self they haven't yet built alone. That's not love. That's dependency dressed up as destiny. That's emotional survival masquerading as a sacred bond. And Nietzsche, he'd call that the most dangerous illusion of all. Because it makes you think you've found something eternal. When really, you've just found the part of yourself you haven't integrated, yet. Let's break it down. You meet someone. They reflect something back. You call it chemistry. But underneath it, you're thinking, around them I feel alive. Around them I feel free. Around them, I feel like I matter. But you're not in love with them. You're in love with the access to your own soul that you haven't yet learned to find without them. That's what makes it feel like loss when they leave. Because they took nothing from you. But they triggered everything you're afraid to carry alone. Here's what this means. They were your mirror. But the fire? That was yours. That version of you, the one who feels bold, electric, poetic, powerful, clear. He doesn't belong to them. He belongs to you. You just haven't made space for him without the reflection of another. Until now. Plato taught that real love takes you beyond the person. Nietzsche would say you must become worthy of the fire you're chasing. And when you combine both, you realize you're not here to be completed. You're here to complete the conversation within yourself. So you stop calling the person fate. You start calling them a teacher. Not because they knew more. But because their presence forced you to remember what you keep avoiding. And what are you avoiding? Your own edge, your own clarity, your own ability to live fully without needing to be chosen, your own willingness to walk alone because the truth is brutal. You needed them to feel whole. But only because you hadn't yet walked through the fire of becoming your own mirror. Here's the shift. You don't need to kill the feeling. You need to own its source. You stop saying, they made me feel alive. And you start saying, I felt something in me I hadn't met before, and now I will live from it, with or without them. That's power. That's sovereignty. That's the fire Nietzsche died for. That's the mirror Plato pointed toward. And now, it lives in you, breaking the spell. You called it love. But now that the fog is lifting, you see it for what it was, a spell, cast by unmet needs. Woven through projection. Held in place by the belief that pain equals purpose. You weren't loving. You were hoping, begging. Bleeding, and calling it sacred. Let's break it completely. This wasn't fate. This wasn't your twin flame. Your divine counterpart. Your once in a lifetime. This was the loudest echo of your unfinished story. And it didn't come to complete you. It came to show you what still lives in the dark. Carl Jung didn't speak directly about toxic love, but he gave us the architecture of it. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what the spell is. You meet someone, your nervous system recognizes their chaos, but instead of running, you lean in. You call it chemistry. But it's unconscious resonance. They reflect back everything unresolved in you. Everything you've disowned. Everything you think you can finally fix, if you just love hard enough. But it doesn't work, because they're not a healing opportunity. They're a pattern. Nietzsche would take it further. He'd say, hope is the worst of all evils, for it prolongs the torment of man. What kept you in it? Hope. Hope that they'd finally see you. Hope that if you showed more patience, more love, more endurance, they'd meet you where you are. They won't. Not because they can't. Because their presence in your life was never meant to complete you. It was meant to collapse the fantasy. And here's the raw truth. The only reason it hurts is because the illusion was beautiful, not the reality, the idea, the dream of who they might become. The future you wrote in your head. The version of yourself you thought would be safe once they fully accepted you. That was the drug. And breaking the spell means you stop chasing the drug and start sitting with the withdrawal. The withdrawal sounds like this. But I know they cared. We had such a deep connection. No one has ever made me feel that way. Maybe if I had done something differently. That's not truth. That's the spell still whispering through your guilt, trying to drag you back into the familiar ache. But now, you don't follow the voice. You see it. You call it what it is, emotional reincarnation. The same wound, in a new face, with the same cycle. Here's what breaking the spell really looks like. You stop making excuses for why they couldn't show up. You stop romanticizing what was just inconsistency with poetry. You stop waiting for closure from someone who feeds on ambiguity. You stop hoping the same pattern will someday become love. You stop abandoning yourself every time they change. For a week you stop. Not out of anger, out of truth. Plato warned that attachment to appearance blinds us to the eternal. And that's what this was. You were attached to a form, a body, a voice, a rhythm, because it carried a whisper of something holy. But holiness isn't found in hunger. It's found in clarity. And once you have that, the spell breaks. This doesn't mean you never loved. It means you see that love, when ungrounded, becomes addiction. That attachment, when unexamined, becomes a prison. That loyalty, when misplaced, becomes self-betrayal. And now, you walk away not because it's toxic. But because you're done confusing longing with worth. Nietzsche's fire burns clean. He doesn't want you numb. He wants you free. And freedom means you don't owe that story another second of your life. You don't need to write one more message. Revisit one more moment. Wait one more night to see what happens. You've already seen that no amount of hope can make someone love from a place they haven't met in themselves. And you've met that place now. Here's the pivot. You stop seeing them as the one that got away. You start seeing them as the one that showed you how much of yourself you had left to claim. That's the gift. Not the person. The mirror they broke open. And now you gather the pieces. You carry your reflection home. Not to heal them. To complete you. Walking away without a scar. You don't walk away because you stopped caring. You walk away because you finally started caring enough about your own clarity to stop explaining it. Started caring enough about your own peace to stop inviting back the storm. Started caring enough about your own life to stop letting someone else's chaos decide your rhythm. This is not escape. This is evolution. The hardest thing about leaving isn't the person. It's the version of you that still believes you're responsible for their healing. The part of you that thinks if you just held out a little longer, they'd finally change. But here's the truth. You can't save someone who benefits from staying broken. And you're not here to be the container for someone else's delay. Carl Jung said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." Now you see how deep this goes. Because sometimes the person you're trying to fix isn't even them. It's the ghost of your childhood. The ache to be needed. The longing to be enough. The pattern of self-abandonment dressed up as unconditional love. So when you leave, you're not just walking away from them. You're walking away from every story that taught you love was earned through suffering. This is how you walk now. Without slamming doors, without performative distance, without rage dressed up as moving on, you walk with silence, stillness, and self-possession. You don't beg. You don't broadcast. You don't leave breadcrumbs. You vanish not because you're punishing them, because you've remembered your value. The goal isn't to win the breakup. The goal is to stop being at war with your own clarity. To stop performing detachment while secretly hoping they'll chase you. To stop saying I'm fine while your nervous system still waits for their name to light up your phone. You don't need closure. You need ownership. Ownership means you don't check their page. You don't just see how they're doing. You don't keep the old messages. You don't make playlists out of pain. You don't build your healing around being better than them. You don't wait to feel nothing. You choose to feel everything and still walk. That's what Plato meant when he said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." You don't conquer them. You conquer the need to keep playing a role in a story that never loved you back. Nietzsche would go further. He'd say, He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And your why, it's not to punish, that it's to purify. You walk away not to make a point but to make space. For breath. For truth. For the version of you that doesn't shrink in someone else's presence. You may still miss them. That's okay. But don't confuse that with a sign. Missing someone is not a reason to return to them. It's a reason to return to yourself. And if the grief comes, let it. But let it pass through a body that finally knows its own weight. You are not cruel for cutting contact. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cold for holding your boundary and letting the echo fade. You are not heartless for not explaining one last time that you've already said enough. Now your stillness says everything. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't need them to say, you were right. Because you are not leaving to be seen. You are leaving to become. So this is your exit. Clean. Quiet. Complete. No residue. No rereads. No waiting for closure that won't come. Because closure isn't given. It's lived. The rebuild. You left. Not in anger. Not in chaos. But with clarity. Now what? Now you rebuild. Not the same life, just without them. A new one. Built from the silence. From the space you once filled with the noise of needing to be chosen. This is where most people run. Into distractions, into new bodies, into rushed healing. But you stay. You reclaim. Carl Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. That's what you're doing now. You're not trying to be okay. You're trying to be true. To speak to yourself again. To listen. To live without interruption. And it's uncomfortable, because no one taught you how to stand inside your own center without needing it to be filled. But this discomfort is sacred. It means you're no longer sedated by attention. No longer chasing stimulation. No longer seeking yourself in someone else's eyes. Here's the truth. You don't miss them. You miss who you were in the moments when they made you forget your emptiness. You miss the illusion of connection more than the actual connection. You miss the distraction from the ache you now have to face. And facing it, that's where the rebuild begins, not in moving on, but in moving into the parts of yourself you avoided while you were busy trying to hold someone else. You need time now, not time to forget them, time to remember you. The real you. Not the performing you. Not the fixing you. Not the version of you that adjusted every edge to keep the peace. The unapologetic one. The whole one. The quiet, sharp, unedited one. And that man. He doesn't need noise. He needs depth. Most people mistake healing for distraction. They say, go out more. Meet someone new. Stay busy. Focus on your glow up. But that's not healing. That's avoiding the weight of your own soul. Nietzsche said, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. So now you sit in it. Not to drown, to build muscle in the silence. You let the ache shape you. You let the space clean you. You stop medicating loneliness with noise and learn to breathe in your own company again. This rebuild has rules. You don't seek replacements. The wound will beg you to find someone new. You won't. Because no one deserves to carry what you haven't cleared. You stay off the stage. You're not here to prove how fine you are. You're here to feel what hurts, until it doesn't. You move your body. Every day. Not for aesthetics, for anchoring. To remind yourself that this body is your home again. You design new rituals. Not routines. Rituals. Movements that say, I'm alive. I'm present. I'm no longer leaking into the past. You stop explaining yourself. To anyone. You don't owe updates to people who only checked in to compare their own pain. The rebuild is not glamorous. It's not something you can post. It's not sexy. It's breath. It's grounding. It's waking up and not reaching for their ghost. It's living with space inside your chest for the first time in months. And letting that space remain empty, so it can finally be yours. This is when you learn the difference between being alone and being clear. Alone feels like a whole. Clarity feels like peace. At first, they're hard to tell apart. But as the noise fades, you realize you don't miss them. You miss being with yourself at full frequency. Now you protect that frequency. You build new boundaries. You redefine love not as who excites me, but who aligns with my calm. You stop confusing adrenaline for intimacy. You stop calling potential compatibility. You stop lowering your standard just to avoid another night of quiet. Because this time, You're not afraid of the quiet that you've made a home in it. Plato believed the soul is drawn toward truth. But the soul gets clouded by illusion. And love, especially broken love, can become the thickest illusion of all. Now you see through it, and that sight is your freedom. This is not the new you. This is the remembered you, the one who moves with rhythm. With discernment. With stillness that doesn't ask to be noticed, because it doesn't need to be. You no longer look for someone to complete you. You build yourself so whole that anyone who enters enhances, not replaces your foundation. From here forward, your life bends around your presence. Not the past. Not the echo. Not the urge to be filled. Just the man who walks alone without needing it to be permanent, but strong enough that even if it was, he'd still walk with purpose. A new standard of love, that you've cleared the field. Now you don't rush to fill it, because this time, you're not calling in love from loneliness. You're filtering it through power, not the power to control. The power to discern that you've walked through enough chaos to know what peace costs. And you'll never pay it again just to feel wanted. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But the question now is not, do they transform me? The question is, in what direction? Because transformation isn't always elevation. Sometimes it's corrosion. And if you don't hold the line, your next love story becomes another slow leak of your center. Let's get clear. The old standard was built on emotion. On spark. On recognition. On the ache of finally feeling seen. But that ache came with a cost. You got seen, but only by parts of you that still needed healing. Now, you're not choosing people who feel familiar. You're choosing people who feel aligned. That means, you don't chase chemistry, you test compatibility. You don't entertain potential, you read patterns. You don't excuse confusion, you require clarity. You don't collapse into attraction, you measure direction. You don't fall, you filter. This is what a new standard looks like. Not louder. Just cleaner, Nietzsche would say. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. You now obey yourself, your rhythm. Your standards. Your pace. When love appears, it's not met with surrender. It's met with structure. You don't become smaller to keep it. You don't become softer to receive it. You hold your line with breath, with grace, with unshakable tone, and see who can meet it. Not out of arrogance, out of self-respect. This is how you filter now. How does my body respond when they're silent? If the answer is anxiety, it's not alignment, it's nervous system memory. Does their presence amplify my clarity or confuse it? You're done mistaking emotional chaos for deep connection. Can I be fully honest without managing their reaction? If not, it's not a relationship. It's a performance. They match the rhythm of my peace, not just the speed of my passion. Because you're not looking for intensity, you're looking for integration. Can I walk away if this isn't it, and still love myself the next morning? That's the new power, being willing to lose everything, except your edge. You used to lower your standard just to keep the story alive. To not be alone. To avoid the silence. To escape the ache. But now, you'd rather walk in solitude than bargain with your frequency. Because your peace is now your filter, and anything that disturbs it is a teacher, not a partner. Plato believed real love was aspirational. Not codependent. Not desperate. Not transactional. A force that elevates both. That brings beauty into motion. That orients your desire toward truth, not distraction. That's what you call in now. Not someone to entertain you. Someone to expand you. This doesn't mean being cold. This means being awake. You can still feel. You can still flirt, fall, open, trust. But behind it all, there's something deeper, standard. Not a checklist. A vibration. A grounded knowing that says, I've walked through too much to bend for less than full alignment. So when someone enters your field, you watch. You breathe. You listen, not just to what they say, but to how your body responds in silence. Does your nervous system open or contract? Do your thoughts expand or spiral? Do you feel more grounded or more exposed? This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. You no longer fall for charm. You read for character. You no longer crave validation. You move from truth. You no longer chase highs. You seek stability and resonance. And when someone meets you there, you don't doubt it. You don't rush it. You let it build from two people who've already chosen themselves before ever trying to choose each other. From here forward, love is no longer a rescue mission. It's no longer rehab for two aching souls. It's no longer a collision of brokenness, that it's a collaboration between two beings who are already whole, but choose to create something higher than either could alone. That's what you wait for now. And you wait with zero desperation because you've become the standard. The return of sacred masculinity, that you're no longer searching for the feminine. You're becoming the anchor she can meet, not to possess her. Not to fix her. But to hold your ground so fully that her chaos feels safe to soften around you. Because sacred masculinity doesn't chase, that it contains. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine within man. He said when a man does not integrate her, he seeks her endlessly outside himself. In women. In chaos. In passion that blinds. And the unintegrated man, he can't hold his direction. He becomes consumed by the very energy he craves. He falls into her frequency and forgets his own. You've done that. You know the cost. Now, you remember your line. Sacred masculinity is not noise. It's not bravado. It's not control. It's containment. The ability to hold tension, emotion, attraction, uncertainty, without flinching, without reacting. Without collapsing. Without turning power into pressure. This is what Nietzsche would call self-overcoming. Not dominance over others, discipline over self. And when you embody it, you don't silence the feminine. You invite her truth through the strength of your stillness. Because the feminine isn't asking for perfection. She's asking for presence. And that presence, it begins in your nervous system. This is sacred masculinity. You don't interrupt her chaos. You hold space for it. You don't fix her feelings. You witness them. You don't explain yourself to be right. You speak when it lands. You don't perform vulnerability. You live congruently. You don't dominate her energy. You direct your own, because the masculine isn't forced. Its form. The structure that gives life shape. You've seen the difference. A man who performs strength needs recognition. Needs control. Needs obedience. But a man who embodies strength, he doesn't need anything. He becomes a field others naturally regulate to. And in relationship, he is not the loudest. He is the most grounded. Plato believed the highest form of love was not possession, but elevation. And sacred masculinity elevates without conquering. He leads by standing still. By being unmoved by projections. By refusing to collapse into performance, defensiveness, or chaos. He leads by returning to center in every moment. This is where love becomes clear. You don't shrink when she tests you. You don't chase when she pulls away. You don't explode when she spirals. You don't collapse into apology to keep the peace. You don't fear your own clarity. You don't outsource your value to her reaction, because your leadership is no longer emotional rescue, it's energetic integrity. This doesn't mean you never feel. It means you never leak. You feel fully. And choose your response. Not from instinct. From intention. And when you move, the room adjusts. The relationship adjusts. The entire dynamic reorients to the gravity you've built inside your breath. Sacred masculinity isn't afraid of the feminine storm. It welcomes it. It knows that her storm is not a threat, but a signal. And when you don't run from it, she doesn't have to scream. Because now there's someone who can finally hold her without disappearing. This kind of man is rare. He doesn't chase approval. He creates trust. He doesn't demand submission. He creates safety. He doesn't apologize for his truth. But he delivers it with weight that comes not from ego, but from inner stillness. You're not here to be soft or hard. You're here to be stable. And stability isn't lack of feeling. It's feeling without fragmentation. It's fire with form. Direction with patience. Depth with clarity. Edge with breath. It's not neutrality. It's grounded intensity. From here forward, you stop bending to earn love. You stand to mirror it back. You stop pleasing to avoid abandonment. You start choosing who earns access to your kingdom. You stop fusing with her pain. You meet it. Name it. Hold it. Without losing your rhythm. That's sacred masculinity. When love no longer hurts, there comes a moment when love stops feeling like a battlefield. And no more strategy. No more decoding. No more walking on eggshells just to hold on to someone who makes your nervous system scream. Because when you've done the work, the real, bloody, spiritual work, love no longer feels like pain. It feels like peace. You used to think love meant suffering. That pain meant depth. That the ache was part of the proof. That if it didn't shake you, break you, or leave you breathless, it wasn't real. But that was never love. That was the echo of trauma masquerading as passion. And now, you've tuned your ear to a different frequency point, one that whispers, not screams. One that anchors, not pulls. One that lives instead of performs. Plato taught that true love moves the soul toward beauty and truth, not drama. Truth. And truth doesn't come wrapped in chaos. It arrives quietly. Fully. With eyes that don't flinch when you're vulnerable. With presence that doesn't spike when you need space. It arrives in the form of someone who meets your rhythm, not because they're perfect, but because they're present. And presence is the only love that doesn't need pain to feel powerful. This is what it looks like. You say what you mean, and they don't punish your honesty. You express a boundary, and they don't see it as rejection. You feel triggered, and they sit with you, not above you. You take space, and they don't spiral. You stop, explaining your worth, and they meet you there, with ease, and you think to yourself, this can't be it. This is too calm. But that calm, that's the sound of love without war. That's the sound of clarity. Nietzsche would call this a higher form of will. Not a will to possess, but a will to live in truth. To love without addiction. To desire without disappearance. To stay grounded even when the heart beats fast. Because real desire isn't chaos. It's direction. You used to measure love by intensity. Now you measure it by alignment. By how you feel about yourself when you're with them. By how easy it is to breathe. By how natural it is to speak. By how little effort it takes to just be. This doesn't mean love won't challenge you. It means it won't confuse you. Because confusion isn't chemistry. It's misalignment. And from now on, confusion isn't a maybe. It's a no. Here's the shift. You stop falling in love with people. You start walking into love, with presence, pace, and full awareness. You stop begging to be understood. You begin expecting to be met. You stop collapsing at the first sign of tension. You begin standing still, long enough for clarity to rise above emotion. You don't fight for room anymore. You simply occupy it. With breath. With rhythm. With choice. This is when love becomes effortless, not because it's perfect, but because you are no longer negotiating your standard to feel wanted. You are wanted. By you. And that energy, clear, rooted, whole, becomes your compass, from here forward. If love asks you to shrink, it's not love. If love asks you to bleed for permission, it's not love. If love disappears when you set a boundary, it's not love. If love feels like you're constantly being tested, graded, or proved, it's not love, because love doesn't ask you to become less. It calls you into more. Not more effort, more of yourself. Plato described love as a ladder, each step moving closer to the divine. And now you've climbed high enough to see that the divine doesn't demand suffering, that it demands truth. And truth means you love without flinching. You choose without collapsing. You stand without justifying. You let someone in, not because you need them, but because they can meet you where your frequency already lives. You've been forged by fire. You've walked through heartbreak. You've sat in the wreckage of illusions you once called love. And now, you carry something rare, not a heart that needs fixing. A heart that's ready. The end of the pattern. This is the final gate. Not the end of love, but the end of the loop. That cycle you've lived in for years. The rush. The ache. The crash. The justification. The rebuild. The fall again. Always different faces. Same outcome. You weren't cursed. You were unaware. Now, you see it. And once seen, it cannot be repeated. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The loop wasn't fate. It was you. Reenacting the moment your soul learned love equals pain, connection equals sacrifice, attraction equals chaos. It was you, searching for resolution in the body of someone who only knew how to give you repetition. The pattern is not who you attract. It's who you allow to stay. It's how quickly you abandon your standard. It's what you justify in the name of understanding. It's how you contort your truth to keep from being alone. It's not about them. It was never about them. It was always about your relationship with yourself. Nietzsche said, man is the cruelest animal. But the cruelty wasn't in how others treated you. It was in how long you tolerated what you always knew wasn't love. The cruelty was self-inflicted. Smiling through disrespect. Giving second chances to patterns you've already survived. Waiting for clarity from people who live in fog. Now, You're done bleeding for the benefit of the lesson. This is how the pattern ends. You stop negotiating red flags. You stop interpreting silence as mystery. You stop labeling hot and cold as chemistry. You stop letting someone's confusion collapse your clarity. You stop playing out pain and calling it depth. This is not a rejection of love, that it's a refinement of your access point. You used to ask, why does this keep happening? Now you ask, why did I ever tolerate anything less than alignment? Because you don't need closure. You need congruence. Congruence means your standards, your words, your nervous system, and your actions are finally on the same page. And no more posturing. No more softness when strength is needed. No more hoping they'll get it. They don't have to, because you get you. This is how you spot the pattern now, from the very first moment. Do I feel grounded in their presence or pulled off center? Do they earn my vulnerability or expect it? Do I start bending my rhythm just to keep the connection alive? Do I start making excuses for their inconsistencies? Do I feel like I'm performing clarity I haven't earned? The body knows before the story begins. And now you listen to the first signal, not the 10th. You no longer chase. You no longer ask for energy to match yours. You simply walk at your pace and let alignment reveal itself. Because when the pattern ends, you stop thinking love is rare. You realize your rhythm is. And it's not your job to slow down so someone can catch up. It's your job to keep pace with your own evolution. Plato's ladder of love ends in wholeness. Not longing. Not imbalance. Wholeness. And in that state, you no longer search for someone to finish the story. You become the author. You no longer read faces for permission to love. You read your own breath. You don't seek relationships that make you feel alive. You live so alive that love becomes a consequence of your embodiment. The end of the pattern is not silence, that it's sovereignty, that it's the point where your yes means everything. And your no. It doesn't come with guilt. It comes with grace. Because now you know, not everything sacred requires suffering. What real love feels like. You've cleared the patterns. You've ended the cycle. Now you're finally ready to ask the real question. What does real love actually feel like? Not the stories. Not the songs. Not the dopamine hits dressed up as destiny. The actual experience. The lived rhythm of two grounded people meeting from wholeness, not hunger. Plato said, love is the pursuit of the whole. Not the pursuit of intensity. Not obsession. Not rescue. Wholeness, which means real love doesn't feel like escape. It feels like expansion. It doesn't take you out of yourself. It brings you further. It meets you, not to fill the hole, but to honor the space you've already claimed. Real love doesn't start with finally. It starts with already. Already grounded. Already chosen. Already whole. That's why it doesn't feel urgent. That's why it doesn't make you dizzy. That's why it doesn't light your nervous system on fire. Because real love doesn't ask for sacrifice. It asks for presence. Here's what it looks like. You feel calm in their silence. You feel seen without needing to perform. You feel attractive because of your truth, not despite it. You feel permission to speak, not pressure to explain. You feel clarity. Even when things get hard, there's tension, but it's clean. There's polarity, but it's conscious. There's desire, but it doesn't hijack your direction. Nietzsche said, invisible threads are the strongest ties. Real love isn't loud. It's felt. It doesn't scream from rooftops. It breathes in the pause between sentences. In the moment you look at each other and don't need to speak, because you both know what the other carries. There's no performance. There's just resonance. You don't feel high. You feel held. Not held like someone saving you from your storm. Held like you're sitting across from someone who built their own center and has room for yours to exist beside it. You stop being a project. You start being a presence. You don't lose your freedom. You become more of yourself inside the space between you. That's the test. Does this love ask you to shrink your truth to preserve the bond? Or does it grow the bond around your unfiltered expression? If it's the second, that's real. Real love doesn't demand healing. But it becomes a mirror where anything unhealed is invited into light. Without shame. It doesn't rescue. It reveals, not through drama. But through day-to-day truth. How you hold disagreement. How you return after tension. How you stay connected while still choosing yourselves first. This is what a real love dynamic holds. Two nervous systems that regulate, not activate. Two missions that support, not distract. Two sexual energies that dance, not dominate. Two paths that move parallel, not codependent. There's no fixing. There's just facing, together dot, but without fusing. You don't check your truth at the door, you bring it dot. All of it dot. And they don't flinch, you cry and don't feel small dot. You disagree, and don't feel threatened dot. You need space and don't feel punished dot. You want intimacy and don't feel needy. Because the space between us and a contract, that it's a container, that's when you know it's love. When you are no longer addicted to being understood, because you feel met in your energy. When they don't complete you, they complement your rhythm. When nothing needs to be dramatic for it to feel sacred. You walk side by side dot. Not behind dot. Not ahead dot. Not orbiting someone else's validation. Side by side. Not in dependency dot. In direction point two people. Whole, awake, unfinished. Building something that neither could alone. This is the kind of love you no longer crave, because now you are at dot. And it finds you when you've made room inside your chest to carry it without fear. Integration that you've done the work, that you've faced the wounds dot. You've let go of the illusion dot. You've cleared the patterns dot. You've redefined your worth. Now, you live it, not as a story dot, not as a process dot, but as a truth that moves through you, not just in moments of clarity, but in the silence between them. This isn't something you will need to remind yourself of dot. This isn't something you will need to force or chase dot. It's something that becomes the air you breathe. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You've accepted the parts of yourself you once rejected dot. The longing, the chaos, the hunger, all of it has been embraced. And in that embrace, you stop being afraid of the depth of your own soul. You stop being afraid of your own desire dot. You stop being afraid of the silence that comes with owning your truth dot. You stop being afraid of your own wholeness. And now, you walk with it dot. Unapologetically dot. Fully dot. Without hesitation. This is what integration feels like. You stop chasing validation dot. Not because you don't want to be seen, but because you see yourself clearly. You stop explaining your boundaries dot. Not because you're cold, but because you don't need to justify what you already know. You stop negotiating your worth dot. Not because you're perfect, but because you finally recognize that your presence is enough. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." You're no longer running from parts of yourself dot. You've stopped apologizing for the parts that didn't fit the story dot. You've stopped pretending to be someone else to be loved. And now, you've become the version of yourself that no one can deny. You feel the difference in how you walk dot. In how you speak dot. In how you breathe, that you've created space to be fully present, in a way that doesn't seek others to confirm it dot. Because now you stand. You stand alone, not in isolation but in self-sufficiency. And that, my brother, is where love is no longer an idea dot. It's an embodiment. The work was never about them dot. It was never about fixing the past. That it was about creating space for your future to stand on the foundation of who you are, not on the story of who you once were. Now, the person who enters your life doesn't have to heal you dot. They don't have to fix the broken parts dot. They don't have to fill the void. They come because they recognize your frequency dot. They come because they've done their own work dot. They come because they're not looking for someone to complete them. They come because they know how to stand that you've created something sacred, a relationship that isn't built on sacrifice, but on the fullness of each individual. The strongest love doesn't need constant attention dot. It doesn't need repair dot. It doesn't need chaos to feel alive. That it simply needs presence. And when you live from that place, everything that comes to you is invited, not chased. This doesn't mean you're done. It means you're starting. The journey is no longer about survival dot. It's about embodiment. You embody clarity dot. You embody peace dot. You embody the man who stands not because he has to prove himself, but because he simply is dot. So, what happens now? Now you don't ask for permission dot. You don't ask for validation dot. You don't ask for approval. You step forward, unapologetically dot. Rooted in truth dot. Rooted in the fullness of who you are. You stop waiting for the world to adjust to you dot. You adjust to the world, but only from a place of truth, not fear. And when love comes, it comes from the same place. Not because you need it, but because you've built the foundation for it to land. And now the journey is complete. Not because we've reached the end, but because we've arrived at a deeper beginning. The beginning of living from your true self, not from the need to be loved, not from the fear of being abandoned, not from the chaos that used to pull you into someone else's drama. Now, you move from peace. Not from perfection dot. Not from arrogance dot. Not from control dot. From clarity. Carl Jung said, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you've done it dot. Not in an instant dot. Not in a grand gesture dot. But in the quiet moments dot. The ones where you chose to hold your line, to stay grounded, to step away from the noise, to stop justifying your existence to anyone dot. You've become who you truly are. And that man, the one who no longer seeks validation, who no longer needs to be saved, who no longer runs after the chaos disguised as passion, that man commands peace. That peace isn't passive dot. It's not absence dot. It's the strength to stand in the center of any storm without flinching. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." Your why is no longer dependent on others dot. It's no longer written in the stories of the past dot. It's carved in the clarity you now carry. The clarity to stand alone, without fear of what others think dot. The clarity to walk through life with purpose, knowing that every step is a reflection of the truth you've embraced. Now you don't chase love dot. You live it dot. You embody it dot. Not as a quest, but as a natural extension of who you are. You see, love isn't something that arrives from the outside dot. It doesn't come as a solution to your loneliness dot. It doesn't come as a rescue from the chaos you've learned to live with dot. It's already inside you. Real love isn't a pursuit dot. It's a recognition that it's the recognition that you are whole, that you don't need anyone else to complete you, that you don't need anyone's approval to walk in your own light, that I end this moment. You are free. You don't need validation from anyone dot. You don't need someone to fill the space of your own worth dot. You don't need to apologize for the clarity you fought for dot. You stand, not because you need to prove it, but because you are sure of your value dot. You've let go of the past, of every story that told you love meant pain, love meant loss, love meant compromise dot. You've reclaimed your center dot. You've reclaimed your power, and now love can come to you, not as a source of validation, but as a celebration of who you already are. The last lesson is this. You no longer need to chase love dot. You don't need to perform, to seek approval, to compromise your peace dot. Because when you're aligned, love will find you. But more than that, you will find yourself. And that's the foundation dot. That's the most sacred thing you'll ever hold. Yourself. You may still meet people who test your clarity dot. You may still face moments where doubt tries to creep in dot. But now, you will recognize them dot. You will recognize the pattern. And instead of rushing to change the situation, you'll breathe, hold your ground, and let your presence do the work dot. So, as we close this chapter, remember this. You don't need to be anyone else to feel complete dot. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love dot. You're already enough. You're already whole dot. You're already loved dot. And when the right person comes, they will see that, not as something you need to prove, but as something you embody. This is your final awakening, to realize that you've never needed to chase love dot. You've only ever needed to remember yourself. And when you finally do, everything else falls into place. This isn't the end dot. This is where it begins dot. And this time, you will never have to look back.